Welcome, everyone, and welcome to all of you who are joining us online, or for those of you that are joining us tomorrow or sometime in the future. My name is Matt Brown, and I'm one of the coordinators here at Bodhi Path Chicago. I'll do just a very brief introduction today, assuming that most of you have were either here last night or have had the chance to watch the recording. Just so that everyone knows, this is all being broadcast all around the world. There's participants joining us online from all over. And for those that can't make the live events, we're making these available for all course participants as recordings. So if you're here and in person or online and you didn't know that, as part of your registration, you were added to an announcement list. And you should have received the link for that recording. Everyone take this opportunity along with me to silence your cell phones. A little helpful reminder that came at just the right time. So this is session number 2 of the Foundations of Buddhism. We're very fortunate to have Trinlay Rinpoche joining us. This session will go from now until about 3:30, about a 2-hour session, and we'll have a half-hour break. And then we'll resume the third session, Central Time, at 4 o'clock. That's -5 UTC, for those of you not in the US. And then we begin again tomorrow at 10:30 Central Time, 10:30 to 12:30, and then an hour and a half break for lunch, and then 2 to 4. I think that's all I'm going to say right now. I'll let Rinpoche do the rest. We've already introduced him, and you can read his bio online. And I just wanted to, again, welcome very warmly Trinlay Rinpoche. Thank you.
So good afternoon, and we will start our session like yesterday with refuge in the 4 immeasurables. Until I have reached full awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. By means of beneficial actions such as generosity, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit beings. Until I have reached full awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By means of beneficial actions such as generosity, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit beings. Until I have reached full awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By means of beneficial actions such as generosity, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit beings. May all beings find happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the perfect happiness that is free from suffering. May they abide in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings find happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the perfect happiness that is free from suffering. May they abide in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings find happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the perfect happiness that is free from suffering. May they abide in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. So this afternoon's first presentation is going to be about the Buddhist view on, existence, or conditioned existence. How come, in other words, as I was explaining yesterday, how come we are here how do we explain our present conditioned existence? So there is this very famous kind of formulation or presentation, brief presentation of the Buddhist teachings, and it's considered maybe the shortest. If you have to kind of summarize very briefly the Buddhist teachings in the most brief form, this can be the accurate presentation. And this presentation, this formulation, is actually attributed to one of the the first 5 disciples of the Buddha. If you remember a little bit about the traditional presentation of the Buddha's life, he was first born into the ruling family of the Shakya clan, and he gave up his position as a prince there, and in order to pursue a spiritual life. I'm summarizing. There are many details to all of this anyway. And after studying and practicing meditation for a number of years, and he discovered on his own the path to awakening. And after his awakening and to what is known as the Vajrasana, or today is called Bodh Gaya, it's a place of pilgrimage. Then the Buddha from there, after 7 weeks, went to Sarnath near Varanasi, and he gave his first teaching to the 5 companions, meditation practitioner companions that had left him because they thought the Buddha wasn't strict as they were in their ascetic practices. And one among them is Ashvajit, and the formulation that I'll try to translate for you is this. So the story goes, one day Ashvajit was begging for alms, and a person who would later become one of the main disciples of the Buddha, Shariputra, saw him and was very impressed by his appearance, very calm and very serene, and asked him, "Are you a master or are you a disciple?" And he said, "Oh, I'm the disciple of Shakyamuni." And so he asked him, what does the Buddha teach? What does Buddha Shakyamuni teach? And he gave this answer, which is the formulation I'm talking about. He said, "Of all that originates from a cause, the Tathagata exposed to the cause, and of all that is cessation to cause, the great ascetic exposed it as it is." So the Sanskrit kind of formulation of it is Ye Dharma Hitu Prabhava Hidun Teshim Tathagato Hayawata Teshim Chayo Nirodha Evam Bade Mahashramana. This is sometimes recited in Buddhist prayers and practices. So it's a very famous formulation. So in other words, what he said there is that the Buddha explained actually how everything comes about, and also how you can be free from it all. In other words, if you have to summarize very briefly the teachings of the Buddha, he explains the reasons of our conditioned existence, and also how we can become free of our conditioned existence. Okay, so this is a very important part of the Buddha's teachings. That means Buddhism is not just about telling us, "Oh, you have to be kind to one another, or just be serene and meditate." there is a very profound philosophical teaching in Buddhism about the view about what is this reality and what can we do about that. So this view also is known as the teaching on interdependent origination. And this teaching doesn't fall into the general two extremes we fall into when we talk about existence, or our life in the world. How come we are living this life? How come we come here? So one extreme is what is known as the eternalistic view. So you have a number of different theories that can fall into that group. For example, theistic views, that there is one eternal first cause that created everything, or that there is something, an irreducible entity that you call the self, that is the cause of everything, for example. So there are a number of different types of theories that you can come up with. All of these theories entail that there's some kind of a eternal entity that is independent, that is producing something else, and it just made this life or this experience possible. So these are known as eternalistic views. And if you actually look into most theories and most religions and philosophies, you always have that component. Another other extreme is known as the nihilist views. So here, this is the view, for example, that actually there's nothing that explains the world. There's no first cause, that once you die, there's nothing after that. So there's kind of a denial either of causality to a certain extent, or can be also associated with a physicalistic view, that there's only matter, for example. Mind is a byproduct. So that's also called a nihilistic view, because it casts away, or it affirms the non-existence of causality, the non-existence of the perpetuation of our mind, for example, or the non-existence of causality between our actions and our becoming, so to speak. So we spoke about that a little bit yesterday, like, for example, the view that, you only live once, kind of that kind of view. This can be categorized. So there's a number of different schools that can diverge from one another, that can be categorized in this group. So here, this teaching of interdependence does not fall into these two extremes, in the sense that the Buddha did not teach that this existence or experience of this world came about from things that cannot be its cause, nor did he say that it does not have a cause and condition. He actually explained precisely what are the causes and conditions of our experience. And so to kind of illustrate this teaching in a little more precisely, there is often, maybe you have seen it if you go to temples in Asia, and particularly in the Himalayas, you can find this representation here, like looking like this. Have you ever seen this? Yes. This is called in Sanskrit the Bhavana Chakra, in Tibetan Sipe Korlo. It means basically you could say the wheel of becoming, the wheel of life. And you have kind of a wrathful being here holding a wheel. And actually this being is the Lord of Death. And he is kind of personification, you could say, of impermanence, meaning that everything that he holds in his claws and his fangs is impermanent, destined to change. So the Lord of Death, Yama, who's holding this big wheel, which is actually a mirror. The idea of the mirror here is that everything that, like in a mirror, although it is appearing, it lacks the true substantiality, like a mirage. Although you see it, there is nothing actually there that really corresponds to it. It's just the experience of these beings. This is another idea on it. And on the very edge of this kind of mirror are 12, you can see 12, there's 12 partitions, 12 little squares. These rectangulars that go around here, these are, there's also an allegory in each of them. And the allegory is the allegory of the 12 parts of interdependent origination. And so it is due to the 12 part of interdependent origination that we come to experience our conditioned existence, and that this conditioned existence can be perpetuated. And also, if you understand these 12 parts of interdependent origination, you can see how you can become free from conditioned existence. So the important point here that underlies this this presentation is so the Buddha didn't teach in the sense that he was trying to give his opinion or his beliefs about the world. He was the Buddha is more a doctor, you could say, than actually a philosopher or someone just speculating. The Buddha's concern is to help us overcome dukkha, the dissatisfaction that is inherent to conditioned existence. And if you remember the Buddha's life, he had a very comfortable life as a prince, but he decided to give that up because he found even that situation to be characterized by dissatisfaction, dukkha. And his aim in his spiritual pursuit was to put an end to dukkha, to dissatisfaction, how you can put an end to dissatisfaction. And this is because he saw our life as being marked by dissatisfaction. Why is our life marked by dissatisfaction? Because of course there are all the painful things that we can experience in life, of sickness, of old age, of death, of course. But also more than that, there is not getting what you want, or that things that you don't want happening to you. And this goes along the fact that things are ephemeral, impermanent. Nothing in this life or whatever we can obtain, whether it is gain, power, fame, pleasure, none of those things are reliable. They are just ephemeral. They vanish, they come to disappear. And as they disappear, they leave us dissatisfied. As long as we don't have these things, we feel dissatisfied. When we have them, it is not truly satisfying. And eventually we leave them, then we have the sorrow of having to leave them. So there is this unhappy kind of situation, you could say, or dissatisfying situation about life in general. This is presented in the first of the Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth of the Buddha is about dukkha. And so in this teaching, he presents that there are three forms actually of dukkha. to kind of summarize what I just said. One form of dukkha or dissatisfaction is related to pain and suffering. It is everything that we consider generally as painful and a source of suffering. There's another form of dukkha, which is actually everything that we consider pleasurable, all our pleasurable experiences. So that can, so difficult for us to say, oh, that's suffering. That's on the contrary, that's what we pursue, what we want. But because of the fact that it is ephemeral, impermanent, it is dissatisfying. We are kind of, we mislead ourselves in believing that it is happiness, because actually there is no happiness really there. It is unreliable. It is something that will pass. And in that sense, so this is a little more difficult for us to understand. Okay? And then there is a third form of dissatisfaction that is even more subtle, that is coextensive to all our conditioned existence, our experience of conditioned existence. That means when we're not unhappy or when we're not happy either, when we're just in our neutral, ordinary state, we don't recognize that in any way as characterized as dissatisfying, but actually it is also a dissatisfying experience, just the neutral state, not thinking about anything, so on. This is even more subtle for us to see, and I think this is probably a unique to Buddhist teachings to present that. That means that, as long as your mind is confused, all experience of confused mind, whether even if it's not experiencing pain or pleasure, it's still a dissatisfying experience. And it's more subtle in the sense that most of us don't at all realize it as happy or unhappy. I don't think anything of it. And more you will practice meditation, more you will become familiar with your mind, and more you'll be able to have access to great stability and calmness of mind. Then you will see the confused state of mind as a source of dissatisfaction in itself. So, for example, if you put a hair in a shoe and you walk, you will not feel it, right? But if you take a hair and you put it on your eye, you'll feel it. You maybe not feel it in the palm of your hand, but you will certainly feel it in your eye. So more your senses are attuned, more you're a master of your mind, the more that subtle form of dissatisfaction can be apparent. But for most of it is not apparent. So the Buddha said all our conditioned existence is marked by that. So where does this dissatisfaction come from? That's the point of the second noble truth, the origin of dissatisfaction. And so here, the 12 parts of interdependent origination can be kind of a more detailed explanation on the sources of our dissatisfaction, which are, briefly put, simply our confusion, our afflictive states of mind, and our actions, our volitional actions, karma. These three are the source of our dissatisfaction, of our existence within samsara. So to come back to this 12 parts of interdependent origination, this is kind of a more detailed explanation of these 3 points I just mentioned. And so the main point here of this teaching is to show that everything arises through interdependent origination or co-interdependent origination. I don't know the exact what would be the best formulation in English for that. Pratitya samutpada in Sanskrit. Tenjing darwarin chungwa. That means arising on mutual dependency. So the idea here is that there's not like one thing that is independent, that is not a dependent thing, on which other thing, dependent things arise. So when we think of causality generally, our understanding of causality is to think that, for example, you have first one thing, and that is independent, and that sets into motion a chain of causal things that depend on it. But the idea of interdependence is that the cause and the effect are mutually dependent. So for example, for us, we might think that the effect depends on the cause, but the cause doesn't depend on the effect to exist, right? For example, I could say, another example is, you have a child, okay? Child comes into existence on the dependence of his parents. His parents are the cause of his existence, right? But you wouldn't think that the parents depend on their child for their existence, right? So that's our general view. But here, the idea is, yes, you as parents only exist because of your child. The moment your child is born, you become at that very moment a parent. You could imagine that, oh, okay, that is nominally speaking, but is it effectively? Nominally, yes, you become parents when you have children. So you are born as a parent, you're on the basis of your children, you could say. However, the Buddhist view is that effectively it is so. It's not just nominally. For example, the understanding here, you could give, there's an example that I find sometimes speaks maybe more to our modern audience, is the example of an explosion. Okay? Take a bomb, for example. Take a bomb. What do you need to make a bomb? You need a container, let's say kerosene, oxygen, and a spark of light, right? And these elements come together in a certain way, and this causal fields come together in a certain way, you can have the result of an explosion, right? So here the idea, we will generally think, we will take the causal field and look at this. So this is the cause, and we will distinguish something, the explosion, as its effect. But actually we are mentally, what we are doing is we are anticipating on what certain number of things can do through our previous experience, and we're assigning something to be a cause. But that particular bomb is not yet a bomb until it becomes, until it explodes, so to speak. So in this sense, if you look at it more carefully, you can see how the very explosion, which is the effect, enables this causal field to become a cause. Without, if it never produces that, it will never become a cause. For example, if you never produce a child, although you exist, you never to become a parent. This causal field, although it could produce such a thing, it is not effectively producing that until it has produced it. In this sense, the effect is dependent on the cause, but the cause is also dependent on the effect. There is, in this sense, a mutual dependency. There's not one thing existing independently producing something else. They are both intertwined, so to speak, effectively. This is the idea of interdependence. Okay, so this is an important point to keep in mind when talking about the 12 parts of interdependent origination. So from a Buddhist perspective, whether it is the world, the universe we see, whether it is sentient beings, or how we have come to experience this existence. This all does not come about without a cause, nor does it come about by a linear causality where there's one independent thing producing, who is eternal, producing something, for example. But everything arises through relation of mutual dependency. If you think about, for example, the emergence of life, the growth of plants, of flowers, all these different things, if you look at it, it is a number of factors that come together, and all these factors coming together, mutually interdependent, enable the arising of certain things. Nothing exists in this sense independently. There is no single independently existing element that can be found. All elements that we distinguish, whether it is water, whether it is fire, whether it is earth, whether it is a house, whatever it is, that thing depends on an array of different things, and all of those things are each interdependent. None of them exist on their own. Okay? And so here, the 12 parts of interdependent origination focuses not on that much on speaking about the world per se or the universe per se, but more focusing on our experience of the world. How come we have come to experience this life in a world? And so it is talking about the inner parts of our mind and how, in our experience of life, and how all of these are mutually interdependent. Okay? So I'll go through the list of the 12 parts of interdependent origination. And so if you have a notebook, maybe it's a good idea to write them down. Then you can review them better, because it's easy to get lost in the list. So the first of the 12 parts of interdependent origination is ignorance. So I guess here when you say first, it's not necessarily, you could say chronologically necessarily first, because these 12 parts, they are all mutually dependent. If there's one of them that is absent, then all the other ones are absent, so to speak. They're all intertwined. But it's first in the sense it is the most fundamental, okay? The most subtle. Ignorance. So conditioned by ignorance are the samskaras, the conditioning factors, you could say. Conditioned by that is consciousness. Conditioned by consciousness is our psychophysical constituents. Conditioned by our psychophysical constituents are our sense faculties. And conditioned by that is our, technical term is contact, but you could say our sensation. And conditioned by that is our feeling. And conditioned by that is craving. Conditioned by craving is our appropriation. And conditioned by appropriation is our existence in becoming, or existence, you could say. Conditioned by existence is birth, and conditioned by birth is old age and death. Okay? So we'll look at these more in detail. So it's interesting to look at also the kind of allegories that are in this representation of the Bhavana chakra. So important point before we go into that, that is implicit in this teaching, is that our mind is not a byproduct just of our matter. It's not a physicalist view. So the idea implicit in Buddha's teachings is that what we are is not just reducible to this body, and you have this mind, and mind preceded this existence and will continue after this existence. So I think that a lot of people struggle with this view because we have a tendency to be very much focused on our present life, on our present body, on what we are now. Most religions, most who have follow the eternalistic view, you could say, they are more comfortable with that view, that there's something after death. It's actually, there isn't any religion that does not speak about life after death. All of them speak. So there's the idea that there's something that survives us from an eternalistic point of view. But the Buddhist view is slightly different from that. They are not talking about kind of an irreducible entity of ourself, that is our ego or the self that exists eternally. They, as I explained yesterday, they speak of the mind as a continuum that is perpetual. And so the main kind of view that opposes this is kind of more the nihilistic views that will consider that we're just a byproduct of the mind is just a byproduct of the body. Now, first of all, if we look at the general kind of impression we have, I find very much in the West, is that many people have, at least, is that that's what's most evident, that we are a byproduct of our body. Yet, actually, if you really look into it, there's no actual proof of that. I think that's an important point. Is as many people have this feeling that, okay, that's true, and it's kind of people who talk about life after death have to justify it as a little bit their fantasy. A lot of people might feel that way, but actually, if you really think about it, thinking that we are just a byproduct of our body is also a belief. It's not in any way proven true. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. And then, second point, there are a number of analyses, if you look at it carefully, that tend to show us how actually our mind is not a byproduct of physical matter. And this analysis comes from looking at what matter actually is. What are the characteristics of matter? If you look at the characteristics of matter, of phenomena, of matter in general. Let's take here, for example, the periodic table. Everything that you find in the universe is made up of atoms, and you can basically find them on the periodic table, you could say. But if you look at those elements, there's nothing in those elements that have the characteristics of sentience, right? So it is a wonder how an association of that could produce something so different from it, that is sentience. Generally, when we look at things that are in a relationship, causal relationship of mutual dependency, there is a continuity, there is a similitude between them. Obscurity doesn't produce light. Light doesn't produce obscurity. Those are two complete opposite things. When something produces something, there must be some kind of relation between them. Whereas here, if you look at matter and all the elements of matter, they all lack sentience. So it is difficult to see how they can produce, therefore, sentience. So you cannot really assign to matter the origin of the mind. So where does mind find its origin? Well, it finds its origin in itself, so to speak. This present moment of sentience, of consciousness, is possible due to the instant of consciousness that just faded away. So that preceding instant of consciousness to the one before that. And you can go like that infinitely backwards. And this present instant of consciousness is the sufficient, so to speak, and cause for perpetuating the next instant of consciousness. It doesn't need anything else. So in this way, mind is considered a continuum that preceded this life and will continue after this life. So you can also look at it like this, somehow the experience of life is something very subjective, very personal. We are experiencing this. How come I'm experiencing this very moment of life? It can't be without cause. And it doesn't make sense that some material objects coming together would produce that experience of it. So it is something, in this sense, very mind. Here I just talked about it in terms of sentience, the fact that we are experiencing, that we know, that we can feel this aspect, that we can be conscious, that we can have concepts, thoughts, ideas. This thing is what we call, in other words, the mind. This is what is very much at the basis of the fact that there's something and not nothing for us. So basically, why is there that and not nothing is not really the point. It's just a reality, a fact that's there. But the problem is that the experience we have is dissatisfying. So what we want to try to find out is what leads to this dissatisfying experience, and can we transcend that and experience something that is free from all dissatisfaction. In this sense, the Buddha is, a doctor. He is, as a doctor would do, first you do a diagnosis, and then you look at the origin of the illness, etiology. And then you make a prognostic, whether you can be cured or not. And then finally, you give a remedy, a therapy. Basically, the Buddha's first teaching on the Four Noble Truths follows this path. First Noble Truth is his diagnosis. Why he underlines this and speaks about it first is because this is what often we are unaware of. We can see pain and suffering, but we don't see pleasure and gain and all those things as dissatisfying at all, and we focus our existence towards that. And somehow we don't look inwardly. That means our mind is always focused externally. We're looking for our well-being or pleasure in external things, and we don't look inwardly into our mind itself. And so it is important for us to actually understand the limits of our existence, that such as it is right now, and see if there is not something really reliable that we can find, because what we are trying to pursue right now is just more dissatisfaction in another form. It is maybe not pain, not as bad, but it's actually even pleasure. It's just another form of dissatisfaction. That's why to become aware of this is very important. If you're not aware of this, then you will not really trying to look inwardly and trying to cultivate the true qualities of your mind, or try to, there's no reason, in other words, to pursue spirituality, meditation, practice, if you're unaware of that. Then meditation will just become another ways of making more money, or getting more, pursuing another form of dukkha. So if you're not able to really at the very start distinguish what is dukkha, then whatever spiritual practice you're doing, maybe it's not an antidote to dukkha. And you are just continuing to perpetuate dukkha in one form or another. So that's why it's very important to first understand this point. And very much the beginning of the path towards awakening really starts with this understanding. If you don't have this understanding, so to speak, you have not come to that maturity that is necessary to start the path towards awakening. And often what is this maturity? Is a general disillusion about life, but disillusion in the sense that we are no longer misleading ourselves. We often mislead ourselves in believing this and that, it will bring us pleasure and happiness, and they're all impermanent. Why would you sit and be happy in a cave with almost nothing, focusing inwardly, if you have not understood that? It's not possible. You will want to have all the external things and so forth. You could pretend to do that, but then that would be just a means for something else, for fame or power or whatever. And so really, to turn your mind away from confusion and turn your mind truly towards awakening, there must be this understanding of the teaching of the Buddha on dukkha, on the dissatisfying nature of conditioned existence. This is very much the foundational point. To really understand this is very important. And then here, as a means of overcoming dukkha, we need to understand also where dukkha comes from. If we don't know the source of dukkha, then we don't know what to do actually. Dukkha is kind of a fatality. There's nothing you can do about it. You're condemned to be dissatisfied forever after. And in that case, then, there's nothing to do. But that's not what Buddha is teaching. The Buddha taught us the origin of dukkha, where dukkha comes from. And that is the very, very precious teaching of the Buddha. And it is presented here in the 12 parts of interdependent origination. So here, this is, in other words, if you want, the key to unraveling the mystery of existence. We always wonder, why is it that I am here? This has been, you could say, the fundamental question of all religions, of all philosophies, of science. Everybody is trying to understand, why is there this and not nothing? Why is it I am here and there's not nothing? See? So there's been many attempts to answer this question through stories you find in mythology, through philosophical and rational thought, and so forth. However, here the Buddha's kind of way of dealing with this is directly through it's a contemplative approach, through practice, meditation, and looking at the true nature of your mind and understanding how our mind functions. So this 12 parts of interdependent origination is somehow the explanation of how our mind has fell into a dysfunctional state that leads to the experience of dissatisfaction. So what's our problem? If you understand the problem, then you can foresee the solution. But if you don't know how the problem occurs, you don't know how to fix it. Okay? So it's a little bit, that's the idea.
So, how would that look in a practical sense from day-to-day life? Like having that understanding of everything as being dukkha. How does one proceed in day-to-day life? Are you aloof from your environment? What does it look like?
So the question is, I have to repeat, right? The question is, how do you deal with understanding dukkha in your everyday, day-to-day life? Well, if you understand dukkha, then really the consequence is that naturally your attachment, your desire, your resentment, all of that kind of naturally subsides, because you're not understanding dukkha means that there's a very strong attachment and very strong hope, expectation, and therefore then you will naturally have a lot of attachment, a lot of anger. If you don't get what you want, you'll be very much focused on this life, on this body, on this present. If you understand dukkha, it will be as, like, for example, you will not be that attached to this life, because you see this life as just a condition that is dissatisfying. It's like, for example, suddenly you are ill, but all along you thought you were not ill, and then now you understand you're actually really ill. You'll be kind of unhappy with your condition, unhappy about, and you will seek how to be free of that. So it's not about just being careless. That's not the point. So some disciples of the Buddha misunderstood that and started to hate themselves and wanting to commit suicide or things like that. That's not the point. For example, let's take the example that Nagasena gives to Milinda Pada. He says, for example, that imagine that you have a wound. Okay, you get cut very badly. You have a wound. Naturally, you're going to take care of that wound, try to make it heal. But the fact that you're taking care of that wound doesn't mean that you're particularly attached to that wound, that you love that wound. You're just trying to make it heal, get rid of the problem. So the perspective of the practitioner is not to hate his body. He's going to take care of his body, but not with attachment, like a wound. He is going to try to heal it and do what is necessary, and work also, turn inwardly, turn towards your mind, understanding that all this experience of dukkha actually doesn't come from something external, it comes from your own mind. Okay, so that question answered. Now let's look at does that answer your question? Yeah, answer your question. And then let's look at the 12 parts of interdependent origination. So there are these 12 allegories in the 12 kind of boxes you find around this wheel I was telling you about. The first one, there's a blind old man trying to find his way with a stick. This is the allegory of ignorance. So Sanskrit is avidya. So ignorance is not understanding, it's being confused about your own mind and about reality. Ignorance is not knowing dukkha, for example. not seeing that conditioned existence is characterized by dissatisfaction. But it's also not knowing, for example, understanding impermanence. It's also, so the means here, taking what is actually a source of dissatisfaction for pleasure. That's ignorance. That is, you mislead yourself in thinking that what actually in reality is actually a source of dissatisfaction, to believe, you sincerely believe it is a source of well-being. To take what is actually impermanent, ephemeral, and considering it to be permanent, for example, that is also ignorance. To consider what is actually not that precious or pure in any way, to be very precious and pure, like your body. To take what lacks a true self, to have a self. Like if you think of yourself, you're just made up of psychophysical constituents. If you look at your body, there's nothing in there that corresponds to this idea of I that you have. If you look at your mind, there's nothing in it that corresponds to that idea of I you have as an irreducible, permanent entity. It's nothing like that you can find. But yet, you take this, you believe in the existence of the I, and you take this body and mind to belong to it, for example. This is also an example of confusion. And this is ignorance. You're not seeing reality as it is. Okay? As there's a more subtle aspect to ignorance also. Of course, when relating to the self, but also relating to how we look at phenomena, as I was saying, permanent. It is basically our mind's confused way of looking at itself. So there's one presentation here from one of our great masters, founders of our lineage, the great master Gampopa. And Gampopa was for a while living in one place in Tibet where this old lady would offer him alms, some food. And this old lady came and asked him for some instructions, asked him to please teach her the nature of mind, to point her to what is the nature of mind. Okay? This is a very important teaching. It's simple, but very profound. So Gampopa told Rupa, go back to your home, and then you might be concerned by many things in your home, cleaning up, cooking, and so forth. Don't think about all those things. Just sit down and then look at your mind. Look at your mind. There's this thing that has all kinds of thoughts, thinking about yesterday, thinking about today, thinking about tomorrow, being concerned about what you have to do, what you don't have to do. But that's the mind. Okay? It is aware of everything. It perceives this, it perceives that through the senses. It can hear sounds, see colors, smell, experience all kinds of things. And that thing that has all those thoughts and all those experiences, that's the mind. And that aspect of the mind is known as luminosity. Okay, so this is by, so I'm commenting here, this is by analogy to light. Light makes things visible, so to speak, makes things manifest, present. In this way, mind has this characteristic of making all experiences possible manifest. And that aspect of mind is called luminosity. It enables all experiences, consciousness, all the thoughts, all the experiences, all the sensations, happiness, joy, emotions, all of these are possible. And this, making all of these things manifest, present, enabling them to be present for the mind itself is its luminosity aspect. Yet, Gampopa told her, now look at this mind, this luminous aspect of mind. And if you look at it and you try to see where it is, what it is, try to get a hold of it, grasp it, you can never get a hold of it, never grasp it, never really find the mind in itself, the irreducible mind somewhere. So that's the emptiness aspect of it. And this mind, although yet enabling all types of experiences to be manifest, and still nonetheless unfindable, neither as existent, neither as non-existent, neither as both or something else. This emptiness aspect is inseparable from this luminous aspect. This is what is known as the union of emptiness and luminosity. So mind in its nature is emptiness and luminosity, inseparable. Yet, this is what our mind is and has always been and will always be. Yet, so to speak here, if you want to talk about the origin, since we're talking about this origin of samsara, so this is the teaching of Gampopa. Now, coming back to our presentation of 12 parts interdependent origination, talking about the origin of samsara. So not exactly going along the lines of this teaching, but pointing out the point related to ignorance here. Look at thinking about the origin of samsara. Well, samsara is possible just due to the mind. And how is it that it became possible? It's due to mind being confused about itself. So how is this confusion actually? There's the clinging of I and other that has arisen, and that has arisen on the basis of this mind that we just talked about, luminous and emptiness. Not seeing the emptiness nature of our own mind, we grasp at it as the self. This is the first kind of, we grasp at it as self, meaning that we think it is a subject. On one hand, we don't see it as empty, and we think it is a subject. And we don't see the luminosity as a quality of the mind, but we take that as an object, as something separate from the mind. Actually, everything that we experience is inseparable from the mind. We cannot know the world, we cannot know anything without our mind. Everything that is manifest to us is made manifest to us through our mind. It is the luminosity aspect of our mind. And not knowing that it is inseparable from our own mind, we take what has been made manifest by our mind as something separate from our mind. And we grasp that as the other, as something distinct from ourselves. And not seeing the emptiness of our own mind, we take it to be the subject. And so this dualism is the basis of our conditioned, deluded experience that gives rise to dissatisfaction. So this, then if you go through the 12 parts of interdependent origination, you can say this is ignorance. So because there is this ignorance, this confusion, there's therefore from that, because there's the sense of I and other, there's naturally an attachment that occurs for the I. That so to speak, gives rise to a certain form of functioning, a certain conditioning. And so these are the conditioning factors, what is known as, here the allegory is the second. So conditioned by ignorance are the samskaras. So these are all the dispositions that come about. So naturally, because there's the sense of I, there will be attraction to what, there will be this dualism and attraction towards what we think is nice. We will conceive of something that is nice, and therefore we will be attracted to it. We'll conceive of something that is not nice, and therefore have aversion towards it. And from that arises the kleshas, the afflictive states of mind. So basically, ignorance is the afflictive state of mind, the confused state of mind. And the samskaras, it's therefore its way of behaving, its way of acting. Because of this fundamental confusion, the mind starts to function in a certain way where it conditions itself in a certain way. Okay? And this way of conditioning has a result, a fruit, which is a way of then interacting with the reality, how we come to see reality. And this is the third of the fourth links, which is vijnana in Sanskrit, consciousness. And this is represented by the allegory of a monkey jumping from tree to tree, trying to catch a fruit. So this means there is consciousness here is because of this condition. So you could say, why is it that we fell, to come back to the point of ignorance, why is it that we fell into ignorance? There's no reason actually for that, really. It's just because it is possible. One of the possibilities. Because the mind being luminous and empty by its nature, it is possible for it to develop this dualism, as it is possible for it not to. If it develops this, then all of these consequences come about, and it functions all together, so to speak, all these 12 parts of interdependent origination. So coming back here to consciousness, consciousness is it's manifest dualistic way of looking at things, but it is also a certain way of apprehending reality. So here in the 12 parts of interdependent origination, this consciousness is also related to the stream of consciousness after death and before the next life. So that means within here, samskara is all of our actions that can be included. That means all that we have done in our previous life. Okay. So some of you might ask the question: when is the first life started? It is atemporal. The first, the second, all of that is just part of our general way of categorizing things. It is without beginning. Time, the experience of time, is a consequence of this dualistic clinging. So it, in this sense, it precedes time. Time is something that comes from it. So it is atemporal. So it is without beginning, so to speak. It's also without beginning because it's just an illusion. It's not a true state of being. It's not the true state of being of our mind. Our mind has never left its luminous and empty state. It is that we have not been able to remain in it. We have not been able to recognize it. Okay? So consciousness is this So based on our previous actions, whether they are wholesome, unwholesome, or their specificities, whatever they are, they will lead us to develop an attraction towards a certain life form. So this is a consciousness, for example. It can be, we can be attracted to a human life or a certain type of animal life. Or if you look from a Buddhist perspective, also to a number of other types of life forms that we are unaware of right now, that we cannot even perceive. There are multitudes of possibilities. And so this is done through attraction. Some of us might ask me the question, oh, do you choose your next life? You know, if you have a next life, imagine you can just choose it. But it is kind of a choiceless choice, you know, in the sense that you think you're making a right choice because you're attracted to it. And you're attracted and you think it's the right choice because of how your mental frame is made up. So, for example, there's this story of a teacher who was trying to help one of his disciples that had passed away. And he saw his stream of consciousness about to enter the womb of a pig, and he was about to be reborn as a pig. So he, through his meditative power, he was able to manifest in front of his disciple and tell him, listen, don't go there. That's the womb of a pig. He looked up and he said, no, master, that is a beautiful palace. And because he's confused, he's attracted, he thinks because of his dispositions, he thinks that that is what is wonderful and beautiful and nice. This is how rebirth occurs. Not that, you know, oh, it's not like you take a book and you see all the parents that are about to have children and you think, oh, whether I've been born in this family or that family. It's your own previous actions, dispositions that give us very strong attraction, and you think, oh, you're going to a right place. Sometimes because you feel that somehow you're afraid that that place is going to be a place where you can hide and be in a safe place. Sometimes because you think, oh, that's a beautiful place. There's a very strong attraction that leads you there. Okay, so this is the consciousness that is conditioned by all of the thoughts we have, all the actions we have done in our life. It will be attracted towards a certain life form. So here, this certain type of consciousness, human consciousness, monkey consciousness, crocodile consciousness, I don't know, whatever you have developed through your actions, and then you will be naturally attracted to the embryo of that life form, corresponding life form, and be reborn there. And then once that consciousness has, so to speak, been attached to and grasped that embryo as me, appropriated it, so to speak, then that is what is called name and form, literally, nama rupa. So this name indicates the psychological constituents and form the physical constituents. So here, so to speak, this consciousness has become, so to speak, manifest materially in a certain life form. So this one is represented by the allegory of a boat with 4 passengers in it. And this represents the 5 aggregates. The aggregate, the physical aggregate, and the aggregate of consciousness, the aggregate of our notions, our perception is another word, of our feelings, and of our dispositions, conditioning factors. And so conditioned by this psychophysical constituent is our sense faculties, the 6 sense faculties. And so this is, there's an allegory that is a house with 6 openings. So these sense faculties are, so to speak, are a way of interacting with the external world. So if you are born as a crocodile or as a human or as a god or in hell or whatever, you will not perceive the same world. You'll not perceive it in the same way. The reality you perceive is conditioned by your psychophysical constituents. For example, if you look at water, a river flowing, your perception of that water is very different from the fish's perception of that water. What the fish perceives about water is something that you have no idea of. And he maybe smells colors or hears sounds, that sees colors, smells different types of smells, he hears sounds that we are unable to perceive. The same with insects, same with every type of being. We as a human being, we share similar psychophysical constituents. So we perceive in a similar way, we interact in a similar way, we think, oh, this is the reality. But reality in itself is neither what we perceive nor what the fish perceive. It's actually, as I said very earlier, it's something that our mind makes manifest, and makes manifest through a concretization of its dispositions, which become more and more, so to speak, materialized through consciousness, name and form, the sensorial basis. So these psychophysical, these basis of our, let's say, our sense faculties is what kind of conditions what we will perceive or how we will perceive reality. And then is contact, that or sensation, that is the actual our sense faculties in the womb have developed, and we are born, and now or just before birth, they have become completely functional, and they are starting to perceive. That is what is called contact. And this is, the allegory for this is a couple that embraces each other. That means that each sense faculty finds its corresponding object. The eye sees colors and shapes, the ears hear sounds, the nose smells odors, and so forth. So their corresponding object becomes concretely manifest. And this is conditioned by our faculties, our sense faculties, and so it's called contact literally, but you can call it, in the Western language, you would call that our sensation. You sense colors, you sense sounds, you sense smells, and so sensation. And then that conditions feeling. That means this is your appreciation of it or not. So when the sensation is pleasurable, you have a feeling of it is, you have a feeling that it is pleasurable, it's nice. When it's not, it's neutral. When it is unpleasurable, you feel you have that it is not so nice. So here the the allegory is a person has an arrow in his eye. That's the allegory. So here you get, so to speak, through the sensation, you get the feeling of what it is. If it's nice, neutral, or not nice. And this feeling conditions the 8th one, which is craving, Trishna, sepa. Sometimes it's translated as thirst. So there's a person who is quenching his thirst. It's the allegory, person quenching his thirst. Meaning here that you have tasted pleasure and therefore you've had that pleasurable feeling. And because you've had that pleasurable feeling, you want to, you're attached to it, you like it, and you wouldn't mind having more of it. Okay? It's also the fact that you have tasted that thing that is unpleasurable. You had that unpleasant feeling. And so you don't want to have that again. You dislike it. And that's a thirst. Thirst is, so to speak, your reaction to the feeling. You have feeling, pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. There's only 3 forms of feeling. And craving is, thirst is your reaction towards those feelings, how you react to that, towards those feelings. That then conditions appropriation, upadana in Sanskrit. And here the allegory is a monkey grabbing a fruit. So here the thing is that your reaction leads to what you actually want. You know, you want that pleasure. You want to have it. So the difference between the two is that the first one is kind of your reaction. Your appreciation or unappreciation of the pleasant or unpleasant. And the second one is your desire to pursue it, to have more of the pleasurable, to have less of the unpleasurable. And then that leads to the 10th, or conditions the 10th part, which is sipa, or bhava, becoming. And here this is, the allegory is a pregnant woman. So this is actually your action. That means, let's imagine you're reborn a crocodile. You ate your first prey, tasted the blood. It was pleasant. You liked it. Because you liked it, you wanted more of it. And because you wanted more of it, you went out and hunted and killed another one. That's becoming. And so kind of the feeling is you tasted it. Okay? It was pleasurable. That's the feeling. The craving, you liked it. Appropriation, you want more of it. And because of that, conditioned by that, you went out and you're hunting and you killed another one, killed another prey. So to speak, that's just giving you kind of more concrete kind of image example. Why is that called becoming? It's because that is action that will have a consequence. So by that act, you are determining your future existence, what you will become in the future. You're perpetuating conditioned existence. And so conditioned by becoming is birth. And birth is, the allegory is a woman giving birth. And that existence that you have determined is conditions age, aging and death, jara marana. And so here is the allegory is a person carrying a corpse to a cemetery. So here this image is that whatever conditioning you have brought about, it is something that is ephemeral. It is impermanent. It comes to change. And it will lead to another experience, but that experience will also disappear. So here, these 12 parts of interdependent origination are actually, there are 3 sequences to it. The first 2 pertain to our previous life. The following 7 pertain to our present life. The last 2 pertain to our next life. But they are all present also within one lifetime, all the 12. Implicitly in the 7 are birth, age, old age, and death. And from 3 to 10, these are implicit. Also, ignorance and samskara are implicit in it. If you want to break down according to their nature, the 12 parts of interdependent origination, they are either klesha, karma, or pala in Sanskrit. Klesha means afflictive state of mind, karma means action, and pala means fruit or result. Number 1, ignorance, is a klesha. It's our confused state of mind, afflictive state of mind. Number 2 is karma, the behavior of our mind because in that confusion. Number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they are fruit, result. Number 8 and 9, craving and appropriation, they're klesha. They're that appreciation and desire or hate. And number 10 is again karma, action. And number 11 and 12, birth, old age, and death, are pala again, condition. So this is kind of a brief presentation of these 12 parts of interdependent origination. Maybe it's a little bit kind of complicated. Anyway, so if you have any questions, we can kind of clarify them at the end. So to come back to this presentation of the Bhavana Chakra, the wheel of becoming. So you have Yama holding this mirror, and you have 12 segments on the rim of this circular mirror, which are the 12 part of interdependent origination. And what is important here to remember, or what are they're all kind of linked with one another like a chain, holding us within this experience of conditioned existence. However, there are a number of weak links, you could say. And this teaching shows us what the weak links are, what we can work on. And there's nothing you can do really about the fruit, the result, and that you have been born, you have this body, you can't change that. But what you can work on and what you can overcome is the afflictive states of mind. That means all this dissatisfying experience actually holds not on the basis of some external will of some powerful being or by chance. It all holds on the basis of the workings of our own mind, and particularly our confusion and our afflictive states of mind. So if we are able to overcome desire, anger, and their very root, this dualistic clinging, then we can avoid karma. And if we can avoid karma, we can avoid its result in the perpetuation of conditioned existence. So here, what this teaches us is that actually our real problem is not just the little problems we have in life of having to get old and die one day and not getting what we want, or the psychological or whatever difficulties we might have in our life. The real problem is that unless ignorance is overcome, this will perpetuate itself indefinitely. We will come to take rebirth again. And unless we have the understanding of these teachings, understanding of our mind, and we're able to work with our mind, our situation can become much worse. We can be reborn as an animal. We can have many, many different types of unhappy existences. And fundamentally, what this shows is that actually these existences and all the suffering and this is in vain. It has no purpose. Samsara is really absurd. It doesn't have any purpose in itself. It is just perpetuation of dissatisfaction. Unless we really practice meditation and we cultivate wisdom and we overcome that ignorance, then we will continue to experience samsara. What the great disciple of Gampopa, one of the great disciples of Gampopa I spoke to you about, his name was Milarepa. And he said, "It is not death that I fear, it is rebirth." Because that is the continuation of confusion and dissatisfaction, and that will lead again to another rebirth and so forth. So the main purpose here of Buddhist practice is not just to, feel well, comfortable, be able to deal a little bit with your emotions. Of course, there are those benefits, but fundamentally is to really be able to free yourself from conditioned existence altogether. And that is not something that far. It's not about some kind of utopia, some kind of paradise, some kind of other world, extraterrestrial or whatnot that would be nicer, where there's more food or nicer people. It's about just actualizing the innate true qualities of your mind that have never left you, that are always present. And so our freedom lies right there within our reach. Whether we can reach that or not depends on whether or not we understand how our confusion functions or not. And whether we are able to fundamentally recognize the true nature of our mind and cultivate it, abide in it. So it's not about becoming actually something very different, becoming awakened. It's about just truly actualizing the true innate qualities that are already present in our mind. And then unless we are able to do that, then this mirror kind of, the Bhavana chakra here presents the gruesome picture of samsara. You have a kind of not a geographical representation of the world, of the universe, but more of based on our afflictive states of mind. Whatever certain afflictive states of mind are predominant, we're more prone to certain type of life forms. So for example, if ignorance, stupidity are predominant, is the animal realm. If it is anger and hatred and violence that have been predominant in our action, it is the hell realms. If it is greed and it is the realm of the pretas. If it is jealousy, it is the realm of the asuras. If it is pride, the realm of the gods. If it is desire, the realm of the humans, for example. This is just kind of giving you an idea that there are many different possibilities. And most of these possibilities are just, imagine being an animal. What is the purpose of your life? You just eat and sleep and drink, and even as a human, what is the purpose of your life? If it's just to consume. At the end you die, and then you have to be reborn again, do that all over again. There's no end to it. And there's no real purpose to it in itself, no meaning to it in itself. So really, it is important that we overcome it. So here also more the image there, like three animals. These are the three poisons: ignorance, desire, anger, that are holding their kind of biting each other's tail. That means they work in symbiosis. They work together. Without ignorance, there is no desire or hatred possible. And desire and hatred go together. They kind of feed on each other, and motivate each other. And you have an ascending and descending path, meaning that some are happier realms, but they are unstable. Even though you have attained them, one day you do have to die and you can be reborn in the lower realms. The lower realms, once our negative, the consequences of our negative deeds, the power of it have been completely overcome due to some remaining positive deeds, we have a chance to also come back up into the higher realms. But the number of beings in the lower realm are always much greater than the number of beings in the higher realms. And once we're in the lower realms, it's much more difficult to come out of it, because generally the conditions are present there to continue to commit more unwholesome deeds and actions. So that is kind of the picture of samsara, if you want. And what we call nirvana is just not being, so to speak, anymore under the influence of our own confusion and conditioning ourselves into this perpetual experience of dissatisfaction, becoming free of that. Okay, so there you go, brief presentation of the 12 parts of interdependent origination. Now I'm sure you have some questions. Yes.
I have two clarifying questions and then one other bigger question. For the klesha, for the afflicted states of mind, that was referring to the 8th and 9th links, the
yes,
the craving and appropriation. Were there other links?
The ignorance.
Oh,
ignorance, the 3. Number 1. And then there's 2 that are karma, the samskaras and bhava, becoming or existence. Existence and becoming, I translated, because somehow our actions, because they are actually designating our actions. Our action is existence and becoming. You know, the action is already determining the fruit that is to come about, result.
And then then everything else is Allah, is fruit.
Right.
That includes
Consciousness, name and form, and the sources of perception, contact, up to feeling. And
it includes
and then
conditioning factors and consciousness also.
I'm sorry?
Oh no, the conditioning factors is karma, but then
Conditioning factors and becoming. Number 2 and number 10 are karma. Number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are phala. 8 and 9 are klesha. And then 11 and 12 are phala again.
Okay. And then one other clarifying question. I didn't catch the image of conditioning factors, the allegory.
Oh, it's a potter making pots.
That's the second, right?
Yeah, second.
Will you repeat? I missed the second one altogether.
The second.
That was the conditioning factors.
Conditioning factors, and that's the potter.
Yeah. It's a samskara. I translated it as conditioning, but some translated as fabrication.
A bigger question I lost, but I'll come back to it.
Okay. Yes?
Earlier you talked about the cause and effect being independent.
Yes.
And the 12 links sound to me very sequential in nature. And can you connect the two? Like,
how they're intertwined?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. The question is, the 12 parts of interdependent origination seemed very sequential. How are they intertwined with one another? Because we talked about them being interdependent. Well, the thing is that they are presented in this sequential form. You can present them going from ignorance to old age and death. But it is said that, for example, meditators, their understanding of it goes the other way around. They understand that death and age are a consequence of birth. Without birth, there's no death, old age. And then birth is because of becoming. And becoming is because of our appropriation because of craving because of feeling because of contact because of our senses because of our psychophysical. They go that way, and name and form, consciousness, fabrication, ignorance, conditioning, or conditioning in ignorance. So there are different ways of you can go. That's from 1 to 12 or 12 to 1. They are mutually dependent in that without consciousness, there is no kind of name and form. They're all mutually dependent. Conditioned by one is the other. And the other also is there because of the present. They're dependent on one another. It's not like ignorance is something that existed all by itself. Ignorance means that there is therefore a way of relating to things, which is conditioning, or mind conditioning itself. And that implies that there is a consciousness, a way of grasping dualistically. You see, so they're all, in this sense, interrelated. If they were sequential in the sense that one existed, then you would have ignorance without having all the others. If one of them are absent, then all the others would be absent. Then it would mean that if there are like separate things, then you would get rid of appropriation and craving and ignorance, but then consciousness, name and form, and sixth sense would still be present. It's not possible. So to speak, consciousness is only a result of ignorance, and ignorance is kind of perpetuated by consciousness. It's not like ignorance occurred one day back in time. At the very beginning, there was ignorance. And we're not in ignorance right now anymore, but we have consciousness. This consciousness is characterized by ignorance.
There are a few different questions coming in from our online participants. First is, are luminosity and awareness synonymous?
Yeah, I guess you could say that they are somehow synonymous, but I would think that the word awareness can mean many different things, and it's not very precise in the sense that of the luminosity as what makes everything manifest. It's more I'm not sure it's perfectly interchangeable.
Another question, can you explain a bit the image of the arrow in the eye?
Sensation. But the eye, if you have an arrow in the eye, it hurts. That's a feeling, you have that feeling. It hurts.
Another question. If we don't manage to reach enlightenment in this life, is there anything we can do in order to be reborn in a human form?
Of course. If you follow Buddhist ethics, so the minimum we can do to make our life meaningful is to be able to regain the same conditions to be able to practice. And that's, you could say spiritually, if you cannot achieve awakening, the minimum you should try to achieve, having had this great fortune of meeting with the Dharma, having the opportunity to practice is to at least be able to get the same type of conditioning, if not a slightly better. So what you can do for that is to follow very strictly the Buddhist ethics of non-violence. If you're able to do that, if you lead a life, so being kind is not necessarily something that you do only for others, it's something also you do for yourself. To not harm others is what the best thing you can do, not only for others, but also the best thing you can do for yourself. So to follow the middle way of the Buddhist ethics, and particularly, avoiding the 10 non-virtuous or unwholesome actions, to not commit murder, to not commit theft, to not engage in sexual misconduct, to not lie, to not insult people, to not slander, to not engage in useless chatter, speech, useless chatter, to avoid envy, malice, and wrong views. So there's 3 that pertain to the body, 4 that pertain to speech, 3 that pertain to mind. If you avoid those, and on the contrary, develop their countries, that means try to save life, try to be generous, try to be faithful and kind in your relations, try to speak the truth, try to be pleasant in your speech towards others, encourage others on virtue, have harmonious instead of slandering, bring people together, praise people so that there's harmony, talk meaningfully, teach things that are meaningful, that are beneficial, or talk about such subjects. Instead of envy, have contentment. Instead of malice, have compassion. Instead of wrong view, adopt right view. Means understanding the causality of karma, and particularly understanding the Buddhist teachings about the absence existence of self and so forth. So you engage in that in this life, and according to your capacities, take vows, like the vow of not killing, not stealing, and to live up to those, then you will for sure, undoubtedly, be reborn as a human. And also with your virtue, you should make wishes. May I come to meet the Dharma again and practice through the power of your volition and your wholesome deeds. You'll be able to take rebirth as a human.
I had a question from earlier. For the 4th point, psychophysical constituents, you described, once the consciousness enters a form, whether it's a pig or a palace.
The embryo of, the palace was just his image, his delusion.
So you said that it attaches to it. It's the consciousness attaching to the form, right?
Well, there's different, if you think of conscious, in this presentation, kind of you think of a consciousness as an immaterial thing, and then it attaches to an embryo. That means it basically identifies with that. It thinks that is me. That consciousness thinks that is me, that is I.
So when that so there's a way of interpreting that, which I don't think is accurate, which is, it's not like the form exists, like pre-exists separately from the mind, right? It's not like it's already there, having come from a separate cause, and then now there's this consciousness which is now.
But there's different ways of looking at it. You can think that, for example, a conception is the coming together of an egg and a sperm and a consciousness, 3 things that come together. And, if you think about the egg, it has its own history. If you think about the sperm, it has its own history and constituents. If you think about the consciousness, it also has, and the kind of appropriation of the consciousness, or the identification of the consciousness with that union also determines how all of this kind of grows or develops together. Some people develop very beautiful bodies. Some people develop ugly bodies. Why does it develop in one way or another, or some with illnesses, another? And this is not explained just by chance from Buddhist point of view, but also the influence of the consciousness that identifies with that matter. So this is one way of looking at it, where you take these things separately, but you can look at it also from the point of view of just the mind itself. For mind itself makes all of this manifest, so to speak. So all of this somehow is not outside of the scope of the mind. And in that sense, you could think of the mind like maybe an image could be like it is like a liquid, or and that coagulates, solidifies on life. So it is as if the mind, because of its disposition, then for itself in its own experience, its actions become solidified into this experience, become solidified and apparent into what it becomes and what it experiences.
I can't remember if one of these wasn't marked. I do not see this other character. This silver breaker box you got?
Yeah.
There's another question online. Regarding reincarnation, when Siddhartha was born, the world population was approximately 100 million.
Now
the world population is 76 billion. How does Buddhism explain this?
Right.
And so the clarification, where did the extra consciousnesses come from?
That's a nice question. There are, if you turn over one stone, you might find hundreds of thousands of insects and animals under it. And how many of those stones are there on this world? Many, many, many. Any of those beings could have been reborn as a human. Just about, if there's only one planet in the whole universe where there's life forms, if there are others, then there can be coming from many different places. And actually, what the Buddhists say is they don't say there's a fixed number of beings. And all sentient beings are not necessarily human. They can be animals. There are a number of different realms as presented here in the Bhavana Chakra, the hell realms, the hungry ghost realms, the animal realms, the god realms, the asura realms, and so forth. All of these different realms, maybe they're not perceptible to us, maybe in other dimensions, or you could say other dimensions, maybe, so if maybe presenting it, are nonetheless possible. The possibility of those existences, we don't need to be able to, with a spyglass, see them somewhere. We can see that there is possible just by looking at our own mind, at the tendencies of our own mind. We can see how, if anger overcomes us and predominates our mind, how the experience that it will give to us will be that of hell. Because anger, you can see when it already arises in our mind, it makes us see everything as aggressive and harmful or hurtful. It puts us in a state of fear. And when this completely predominates in our mind, then there's a corresponding world that we come to experience.
No, I found the converse question that relates to that. And I might not have my dates quite right, but about 300 billion years ago, there was a big bang that created the universe, and the temperature was somewhere around 300,000 degrees Kelvin. So where were those
beings then?
beings then?
Oh well. Well, one has to.
Can we repeat the?
Yeah, the question is that over 300 billion years ago, there was a big bang with great heat, and where was all sentient beings at that time, right? So I find that very fascinating theory. It's very nice, but one has to remember that often what science tells us today is their best speculated guess. They don't actually know for sure. Also, if you think of a Big Bang as the effect of something, there must be something that has a cause for it. And there is no effect that arises without a cause. And if there is a cause to that, then that thing also has a cause. And you can go back and back and back and back further. This is the limit of our possibility in looking at matter, looking at the universe, and looking at all the instruments and means that we have. This is as far as we can go. That doesn't mean that we cannot go further. And that doesn't mean that through that we have, looked through the entirety of what the universe is, what all the possibilities are. So there may be other universes, maybe different things. It's difficult to say. But in any way, sentient beings, their minds have been present, so to speak, without beginning, each of them. And so to speak, also the universe is without beginning, truly. If you think about it from a Buddhist perspective, it has no true origin. It cannot be dissociated from a consciousness. We often think of the universe or the Big Bang, it's how the matter came about. That is what is first, and then the consciousness arise in it. But this is somehow our kind of distorted way, if you really think about it, somehow distorted way where we are completely ignoring our mind. We're just completely focused on what the mind has made manifest, without seeing that everything that we are seeing is made manifest by the mind. And we're thinking of it in itself as something completely distinct. But although we may see causality, and it may have all the characteristics of being something distinct, nevertheless, it is unknowable without a mind. It has, as such, no existence without a mind seeing it, perceiving it. So whether it is the Big Bang, whether it is whatever theory, it is not something that can happen independently from a mind. It's still just a theory that we develop in our mind. And this theory comes basically from the fact of also our focus being entirely on what the mind has made manifest without looking at the mind itself.
So there's one question, I don't know if we're over there, maybe
Yeah,
one last question
sure.
from the chat, and then we'll take a break.
Yes.
So this is thinking about the story of the crocodile, as well as how humans need to eat to survive. Does the fact that we as humans need to eat to survive make it more difficult to get out of samsara? Even with eating vegetables, bugs and beings still may get killed in the cultivation of vegetables. So how do you get out of this, since we need to eat to survive? It seems very difficult to get out of.
Well, the path to awakening is not just the fact of, it's not because you will never eat an animal or maybe starve yourself to death that you will become awakened. The key to awakening is overcoming ignorance. And that means understanding the true nature of your mind. If you understand the true nature of your mind, then you overcome karma. There's no more karma. If you haven't understood the nature of your mind and you are still within the workings of karma, then of course harming the less possible you can other sentient beings is important to make sure that you have within the workings of karma a better life in your next life, in this present life, and also not creating more suffering for other sentient beings. But without you, even if you stop harming other sentient beings, that doesn't mean that all sentient beings will be out of harm's way. They are still within confusion. So they also have to understand their true nature of their mind and become awakening to totally be free of harm. And that is also what you have to do if you want to become totally free of karma and its consequences. So thank you. I will conclude our session through the dedication of merit. Through this merit, may I attain true omniscience, and having overcome all harmful, destructive forces, may I liberate sentient beings from the ocean of existence, stir in its waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. Thank you.
For those of you who are online, we are going to, well, first we'll stop the recording and we will leave the video feed open. We will mute the audio just so that you don't hear the background noise, and we will reconvene right around 4 o'clock. That's 22 minutes from now. Okay, thank you.